The manager humiliates a humble elderly woman, but when he discovers that she is the owner of the market, he panics. Before the story, leave a comment below letting us know which city you're watching from. Enjoy the video. It was a cloudy morning, as if the weather shared the mystery that Mrs. Carmen carried as she made her way to the market that, decades ago, she had founded with so much care. Now, after years away from the business, she felt it was time to visit the place again. But this time, in a different way. Dressed in a modest outfit of an ordinary elderly woman and leaning on a simple cane, Mrs. Carmen had a calm expression and an observant gaze, as if she could see beyond appearances. Her slow, calculated steps revealed neither her identity nor her history with that place. As she crossed the market's entrance, a slight melancholy took hold of her. The facade was modern and flashy, very different from the simple store she had inaugurated. However, as she stepped inside, the nostalgic glow gave way to a sense of unease. There was something in the air, a heavy, tense atmosphere that contrasted with the cheerful environment she had always strived to maintain. Employees hurried by, with anxious looks and worn expressions. She approached the service counter, where a young employee greeted her with a shy smile, but was soon interrupted by a deep, authoritarian voice. "We don't have all day. Let's speed this up," said Andrew, the manager, in a cutting manner. Mrs. Carmen looked up and saw Andrew, a young man with a puffed-out chest and an air of superiority plastered on his face. She realized he considered himself the owner of the place, as if the world revolved around his presence. The way he spoke, the unnecessarily harsh tone, all of it made her feel a mixture of indignation and sadness. Seeing her standing there, he approached and looked her up and down, as if questioning her presence. "Yes, ma'am," Andrew asked with undisguised disdain. "We need to clear the aisle, so if you're buying something, make it quick." Mrs. Carmen was unfazed. She knew that true respect didn't come from appearance or how quickly you serve a line. She gently smiled in response to Andrew's harshness. "It's my first time visiting the market," she said calmly. "I'd like to get to know the place better." Andrew raised his eyebrows, barely hiding his boredom. He was clearly impatient, but not knowing what else to do, he gestured casually toward the aisles, still with an indifferent look. "It's all there, ma'am. Just take a look. No need to stand around, and be careful not to get in the way of other customers." She nodded and moved away slowly, walking through the market. She looked at the shelves, the products that many years ago she had carefully selected to create the environment. Now, there were different products, a different arrangement of the shelves, but her attentive gaze noticed every detail: the resigned look of an employee restocking products, the tired sigh of a cashier who barely exchanged words with customers. At a certain point, Mrs. Carmen stopped near the dairy section, where an elderly lady, who appeared to be a regular customer, was asking about a deal she used to find there. "We don't have any deals in this section, ma'am. Come back another day," Andrew replied impatiently. "I've been buying this here for years." It was the founder herself, who always said that the customer should be treated with care, the customer remarked, not realizing the tension she was creating. Andrew laughed mockingly. "Those ideas are from another era. Nowadays, the founder probably doesn't even know what's going on here, and she certainly has no reason to complain. This market is better than ever, organized and efficient." Andrew's response sent a shiver down Mrs. Carmen's spine, and she took a deep breath. She remained silent, observing the cold and insensitive way Andrew treated that lady, who left visibly embarrassed. At the end of her visit, Mrs. Carmen decided to approach Andrew again, testing just how far his behavior could go. She approached the checkout counter and, looking at him, she asked, "And you, young man, how long have you been working here?" He sneered and replied, "Long enough to keep things under control. But honestly, this is not a place for questions, just for buying and leaving." Mrs. Carmen maintained her composure, but felt the weight of that response. In silence, she left the market, She knew she needed to observe more. Andrew, immersed in his own arrogance, had no idea who that apparently fragile and humble lady was, but she was determined to keep going. The market, the environment she had created to be welcoming and familiar, was now dominated by disdain and indifference. The next morning, Mrs. Carman returned to the market with the same discretion and serenity as the day before. Her simple appearance and calm gestures didn't draw the attention of customers, but each detail captured the charged atmosphere, allowing her a keen observation of what was going on. As she walked, she saw Andrew instructing a group of employees near the deli counter. He spoke in a harsh tone, without bothering to moderate his voice. Each order was accompanied by an irritated expression, as if the team consisted of incompetence he was forced to tolerate. "You need to learn to be faster. I won't accept mistakes. Understand?" he said, crossing his arms and watching them with a look of reproach. "Each one of you has tasks, and I expect you to do at least the minimum decently." Mrs. Carman observed one of the employees, a young man, frowning, visibly uncomfortable. It was clear he wanted to respond, perhaps explain the difficulties they were facing or why they were slower. But Andrew's intimidating look made him hold back. A feeling of helplessness hung in the air, and Mrs. Carman felt a pang in her chest, witnessing this kind of leadership, which was the opposite of the values she had cultivated since founding the market. Moving further along, Mrs. Carman discreetly approached the produce aisle, where she found Emily, an employee who from afar seemed the most attentive and dedicated. Emily was known among customers for her gentle smile and patience in helping, but that morning her face was dim, her eyes distant as she organized the fruit. Noticing Mrs. Carman's presence, Emily approached and smiled, like someone meeting a friend. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you need help?" Emily asked, showing a genuine cordiality that contrasted with the rest of the environment. "I'm just looking, dear," replied Mrs. Carman, returning the smile. "But I notice you're one of the few people here who seems at peace. Everyone seems so tired." Emily sighed, as if carrying an invisible weight. "I think many of us feel that way," she confessed, lowering her voice. "It's hard to keep your spirits up when there's no support." Before the conversation could go further, Andrew appeared at the end of the aisle, crossing his arms and casting a disapproving look at Emily. "Less talking and more work, Emily. We're not here to chat," he reprimanded in a harsh tone. Emily, embarrassed, quickly returned to work, but Mrs. Carman noticed the sadness in the young woman's eyes. She then continued on her way, pretending to look for something among the shelves, but actually getting closer to continue observing Andrew. It was then that she witnessed a revealing scene. An elderly lady, accompanied by her granddaughter, approached Andrew to ask about a product on sale. Mrs. Carman noticed Andrew's cold gaze, clearly lacking patience to deal with customers he considered less important. "That product isn't on sale for you, ma'am," he replied in a tone that mixed disdain and irritation. "The sale is valid for those with the store card. If you didn't bother to sign up, that's not my problem." The lady, embarrassed, smiled awkwardly and nodded in thanks. Mrs. Carman approached her, offering help and discreetly guiding her to another register where she would be better served. With that, the lady left more at ease, but Andrew still cast a bored look in Mrs. Carman's direction, clearly annoyed by her presence. "Ma'am, if you're not buying anything, please make room for other customers." He insisted on treating her as an inconvenient figure. Mrs. Carman remained serene, but felt her indignation growing. She was perplexed by the contempt Andrew showed towards customers and, worse, by his abuse of power when dealing with his own employees. Throughout the morning she followed his steps, witnessing his rigid posture, lack of empathy, and haste to dismiss anyone who seemed not to add value to the market. Mrs. Carman noticed that Andrew seemed to judge people by appearance, acting attentively only to those he considered good for business, such as young executives or customers with an elegant appearance. The others, in his eyes, were dispensable. At the end of the visit, Mrs. Carmen was convinced that there was a much bigger problem than she had imagined. She needed to act, but not in haste. The right moment would come. However, her presence hadn't gone unnoticed by Emily, who, even without knowing who that lady was, sensed something special about her. When the shift ended, Emily went to her and, in a gesture of kindness, offered to accompany her to the exit. "You know, it's good to see someone who notices the little things," Emily said. "Sometimes it feels like everything here moves too fast and people don't realize who really makes a difference." Mrs. Carmen smiled, lightly touching Emily's shoulder. "Thank you, my dear. I think we just need to remind people what really matters," she replied, with the tone of wisdom and serenity of someone who held a secret mission. As she left the market, Mrs. Carmen knew that her visit was just beginning. She needed to see more, to understand how far Andrew's disrespect and intolerance could affect the spirit of the place she built. The day dawned, bringing with it the hectic rush of a long holiday, which filled the market with customers eager for sales and stocking up. Mrs. Carmen arrived early, observing everything with the keen eye of someone who knew every corner of that place. Today, however, she felt that something more needed to be done. It was the day she intended to test just how far Andrew's arrogance could go. Right from opening, the market was in chaos. Long lines at the registers, customers complaining about the wait, and employees running from side to side, visibly exhausted. Andrew was at the center of it all, ordering, pointing out mistakes, and reprimanding the team with his usual lack of patience. Every word seemed loaded with frustration and disdain, making the atmosphere even more charged. Mrs. Carmen blended in with the customers, observing the interactions and Andrew's inflexible posture. At one point, she saw a father with a young child at one of the registers, trying to understand why the point system hadn't applied a discount. The cashier, unsure, looked to Andrew for help. "If he doesn't have enough points, that's his problem," Andrew replied loudly enough for other customers to hear. "No one here has time to educate uninformed customers." The man, clearly embarrassed, muttered thanks to the cashier, took his purchases, and quickly left with the child. The look of frustration in the customer's eyes did not go unnoticed by Mrs. Carmen, who felt her patience beginning to wear thin. Once again, she forced herself to contain her reaction. After all, there was still more to see. In the afternoon, the situation only worsened. Mrs. Carmen saw an elderly lady dismissed with an impatient gesture by Andrew when she tried to ask for help. She, tired and disappointed, left without completing her purchase. Other customers, dissatisfied with the cold and disorganized service, abandoned their carts, leaving amidst expressions of dissatisfaction. Mrs. Carmen saw that the employees, demotivated, served in a robotic manner, without the enthusiasm she had encouraged in her days as the active founder. Even Emily, normally so attentive, seemed drained, limiting herself to offering help without her usual smile. Finally, near the end of the shift, Andrew spotted Mrs. Carmen and with a look of disdain approached her in the main aisle, ready to make an example in front of others. "You again, ma'am?" he said almost theatrically. "What are you still doing here? This market isn't a meeting point for idle elderly people. I hope you buy something and leave soon." Hearing those words, Emily, who was nearby, stopped, incredulous. Other employees and some nearby customers fell silent, shocked by what they had just heard. It was as if an invisible barrier had been broken. "Andrew, you can't talk like that." Emily, for the first time, spoke out loud, her tone vibrating with a mix of anger and despair. Andrew, surprised by her reaction, crossed his arms and gave her a stern look. And since when, Emily, do you think you can question the way I manage this place? He retorted, annoyed. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes full of restrained tears, but without averting her gaze. Because this lady is not just anyone. She's the very founder of this market, she said, her voice almost trembling but firm. The words echoed through the aisle like an unexpected storm. The employees and nearby customers exchanged glances in shock, while Andrew's face paled. For a brief moment, he tried to process what he had heard, but the weight of the revelation hit him like an unexpected blow. He opened and closed his mouth, as if trying to find something to say, but no words came. Mrs. Carmen observed the scene in silence, her expression still serene, but her gaze firm and determined. Now that her identity had been revealed, she remained still, letting the moment unfold by itself. Andrew, finally understanding the magnitude of the mistake he had made, lowered his head, visibly stunned. The silence was broken by whispers among the customers and employees who were trying to absorb the revelation. Andrew, feeling the attention and gazes of everyone around, finally stammered, I didn't know, Mrs. Carmen. I'm sorry. I had no idea who you were. Mrs. Carmen took a deep breath and looked at him with the same serenity she had maintained from the beginning, but this time with a touch of severity in her gaze. You didn't know, Andrew, she said calmly. So, does the respect that's missing here depend on who is in front of you? Only those you consider important deserve to be treated well? He was speechless, his hands trembling, his ashamed gaze fixed on the ground. It was evident that he understood, albeit belatedly, the weight of his actions. Emily, noticing the impact of Mrs. Carmen's words on him, took a step back, touched by the scene she herself had triggered. Mrs. Carmen's presence there, so silent and powerful, served to show everyone that a leader is not defined by hierarchy, but by the way he values the people around him. Andrew, still in shock, muttered another apology, now with more sincerity. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I was arrogant and unfair to everyone, especially you, Ma'am. He took a deep breath, his voice almost breaking. And I thank you for showing me this, even if in such a harsh way. Mrs. Carmen observed Andrew for a few more seconds, letting him feel the weight of his responsibility, and then nodded with an understanding look. We all make mistakes, Andrew, but it's how we correct them that defines who we are. With that, she walked away, leaving an air of reflection and respect that seemed to dispel the tension that had reigned in the market in recent days. Andrew, for his part, stood still, looking at the floor, feeling the weight of his actions. He knew there was a lesson to be learned and that perhaps there was still a chance to redeem himself. Gradually, people resumed their activities, but the market seemed different, quieter, as Andrew processed the impact of that unexpected revelation and the new path he would have to take from then on. The next morning, Andrew arrived at the market earlier than usual, with the weight of the previous day's revelation still fresh in his mind. The humiliation of realizing his cruel and petty behavior toward the market's own founder was overwhelming and left him restless. He had barely slept, recalling every disappointed look, every gesture of contempt with which he had treated employees and customers, as if everything he had done in recent months now returned in a crushing wave of regret. As he walked through the quiet aisles of the market, he saw Mrs. Carmen talking to Emily, the young employee who had revealed her true identity. They seemed calm, and the way Emily smiled and listened attentively to Mrs. Carmen reinforced what Andrew now understood. That woman was a born leader, someone who inspired respect without needing to impose herself. Her presence radiated a wisdom that seemed to envelop everyone around her. Seeing him, Mrs. Carmen exchanged a look with Emily, who discreetly walked away, leaving them alone. Andrew took a deep breath, trying to find words to express what he felt. Mrs. Carmen, he began, his voice breaking with emotion. I need to apologize for everything. I was arrogant, unfair. I treated you and everyone here with disrespect. He lowered his eyes, shame pulsing in his face. All I can do is ask for forgiveness and say that I'm truly sorry. Mrs. Carmen remained silent for a moment, allowing him to feel the weight of each word. Then, with a gentle gesture, she lightly touched his shoulder and said in a serene tone, "Andrew, regret is the first step toward change. But a true leader is not someone who imposes through fear or force. It's someone who builds respect and trust through their actions, through their humility, through their attention to each person who is part of this place." Andrew listened attentively, almost without breathing. It was as if, for the first time, he was truly understanding what it meant to lead. "This market," continued Mrs. Carmen, her gaze traveling around the space, "was founded with the intention of being more than just a place to shop. It was created to be a welcoming space where anyone, regardless of their condition, would be treated with the same respect and dignity. That's what I believe, Andrew, and I hope you understand now." Andrew swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of shame and gratitude. He was in front of a woman who had every reason to fire him or even confront him publicly, but who instead chose to guide him with calm and understanding. "I understand, Mrs. Carmen. I understand now, and I know I need to change. Please give me the chance to prove that I can do things differently." Mrs. Carmen looked at him seriously but warmly and finally nodded. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Andrew. I believe you have potential, but you need to change the way you see the people around you. You need to see the value in each one, to understand that each employee, each customer, contributes to what this market represents." Andrew felt his eyes well up, surprised by the depth of her words. "I'll do it, Mrs. Carmen. I'll change, and you'll see a different Andrew from now on. I promise I'll honor what this market represents." Mrs. Carmen gave a slight smile, a mix of compassion and hope, and encouraged him with a simple nod. "I believe in you, Andrew. It won't be an easy journey, but I'll be around. I want to see the leader you can become." Those words had a powerful effect. Andrew knew he couldn't allow himself to fail. With that, they said goodbye, and he went to start his work. The employees, seeing him, noticed a change in his posture. He was quieter, with a thoughtful expression, like someone reflecting on every word and every gesture. Throughout the day, Andrew began putting Mrs. Carmen's lessons into practice. In every interaction, he made an effort to be kind and listen attentively. When an elderly customer asked for help, he went to him with patience, without making sharp comments or expressions of boredom. He also noticed the effort of each employee, especially Emily, who now looked at him with surprise and curiosity, not fully understanding the sudden change. Mrs. Carmen's presence was felt throughout the day. She observed Andrew discreetly, like a silent guide there to support him, but also to ensure he kept his promise. Andrew, in turn, felt a mix of responsibility and gratitude. He was aware that this would be a long journey, but now he understood the importance of learning from each step. The market, the space that had previously felt suffocating and rigid under his leadership, began to breathe differently. In the following days, Andrew's change was subtle, but undeniable. He had started the journey with timid steps, still carrying the weight of bitter memories of his old behavior, but gradually the impact of his renewed actions began to manifest in the market. As he opened the establishment in the morning, Andrew was the first to greet the team. His words, previously filled with coldness and impatience, now came with a warmth that even he was surprised to transmit. A good morning to each employee, a genuine smile for the customers, even in the busiest moments. Observing each employee's effort, He remembered Mrs. Carmen's words about leadership, about how respect and valuing each person were the true pillars of a healthy environment. Emily, who had been the first to challenge him in defense of Mrs. Carmen, noticed each of Andrew's gestures with admiration and a hint of disbelief. It was the same Andrew, but at the same time, a completely different one. Now he cared about understanding the difficulties and challenges of each department, often directly asking what he could do to ease the team's work. More than once he helped load goods, took the lead in organizing shelves, and instead of harshly reprimanding mistakes, began to offer guidance. One day, seeing a humble customer looking for items on sale, Andrew approached with a genuine smile and offered to help him find what he needed. That customer, who previously would have received only a disdainful look, was surprised by the attention the market manager gave him. As he left, the customer looked at Andrew and commented, "This market has changed. It's more welcoming. We feel welcome here." Those words brought an unexpected emotion to Andrew. He realized that his transformation affected not only the team, but also each person who walked through those market doors. Mrs. Carmen, always present, observed from afar, discreetly guiding when necessary. She followed each of Andrew's progress as a silent mentor, noting that his change was not just superficial, but genuine. Each small gesture he made, each kindness offered to customers and employees, showed that he was indeed absorbing the essence of what she had taught. For her, seeing this change was the greatest reward, the proof that the environment she had created could finally return to being the welcoming and respectful place she had always dreamed of. The employees, previously tense and demotivated, now worked with renewed spirit. Emily, especially, felt proud of her position and the environment that was taking shape. She now saw in Andrew an example of overcoming and transformation. What had once been a heavy and oppressive atmosphere was becoming light and productive, each day more like the market Mrs. Carmen had founded. Over time, the changes became so evident that customers themselves commented on the difference in how they were treated. Many began to feel part of the market again, noticing that each one was valued, regardless of who they were. Andrew, who once seemed distant and inaccessible, now made it a point to be present, to listen to every comment, and to thank each customer personally. One day, while talking to Mrs. Carmen, Andrew reflected, "You know, Mrs. Carmen, I think I finally understand what you meant. Each person here, each employee, each customer is as much a part of this market as I am. And now I see that leading is serving, being available to help, not to be feared." Mrs. Carmen smiled, satisfied with the transformation she was witnessing. She nodded, placing her hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Andrew, you've learned something that many spend their lives without understanding. Being a leader is, above all, being humble. True strength is not in being bigger, but in lifting others up with you." Andrew felt the depth of those words and kept them as a constant reminder of his journey. He knew that this process of transformation did not end there, but as he looked at the market, at the team, and at each customer who greeted him with smiles, he felt proud of every step he had taken thus far. Thus, the market returned to being a welcoming space where everyone felt respected, from the simplest customer to the most demanding one. Mrs. Carmen, seeing that her mission was complete, decided to step back again, but she knew that her legacy was in good hands. Andrew, transformed by her patience and wisdom, now carried the true spirit of leadership, and the market, that place that had once been her dream, now flourished again with renewed brightness of respect and humility. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.